like a Hellcat.
Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for another Sega Saturn review, where I thought we'd continue my recent trend of light gun games by taking a look at one of the most well-known light gun games of all time. I am of course talking about The House of the Dead, which originally saw release in September of 1996 in the arcade, before a March 98 release on the Saturn in Japan, followed by an April 98 release in the PAL region, and finally a May 1998 release over in North America. So the story for House of the Dead is very simple, but it does the job. Dr. Curian, a scientist and an expert on the human genome theory, has driven himself mad after finding the link between life and death, and he's resurrected the dead. And unfortunately, he's released all of his creatures on his own workers, and it's down to AMS agents Thomas, Rogan and G, who are sent to the Curian mansion, and they have to stop the Doctor's plans and try and rescue all of the hostages, which includes Sophie Richards, who is the fiancée to Thomas Rogan. So once the main menu hits and you press start, you'll see you've got arcade mode, Saturn mode, boss mode, ranking and options. Heading into options, we've got all of our familiar settings that you can expect to see in light gun games, choosing the difficulty, number of lives, number of continues, sight speed, sight graphics, audio, sound test, music test, controller configuration, and of course gun configuration if you are using a light gun. So like always, we're going to start with visuals first, and unfortunately The House of the Dead on the Saturn is never going to win any awards for the way it looks. It's got this slightly ropey, unfinished look to it, which just doesn't give it a good presentation. It's quite glitchy, it's got very poor textures. I think they're really, really bad. Even if we're comparing it to the games Virtual Cop and Virtual Cop 2, which are quite a lot older than this, they look considerably cleaner and crisper and a lot more presentable overall. They do. Now, it's not all bad because there's quite a lot of variety with all of the enemies in the game, which is great. The setting for the game really suitable. It's got quite a scary feel to it, in all fairness, especially for this point in time. So I do think they're positives, but overall in the looks department, it just simply doesn't cut it for 1998. Now, this game was developed by Tantalus. Apparently they had to rush to do it, and we found a lot of the time with third-party developers on the Saturn, they couldn't get the best out of the console. Obviously, we've seen Sega and the AM2 group pull off great-looking games on the system, but I found a lot of the time the third parties just couldn't get the most out of the system, and I do feel that's the case here with the House of the Dead. So overall, in the looks department, not House of the Dead's strongest point. So moving on to the sound effects and music next, and it's quite a good contrast to the graphics because the sound effects, and in particular the music for the House of the Dead, are very strong. I feel the soundtrack is really great. It's got this high intensity to it, but it's also got a creepy feel as well, and it blends those two elements together really, really well. I feel light gun games, certainly arcade style ones like this, benefit from high intensity soundtracks, and House of the Dead does not disappoint. Now, sound effect quality is also pretty good in general. The monster sounds, the firing of your guns are pretty good. The only downside is the slightly lower quality voice acting that so many games really back then still had. It wasn't quite as clear or crisp as I would want, but that really is the only negative in the sound effect department. So what I'll do is give you some examples of the musical tracks so you can decide for yourselves just how good you think they are. Now moving on to the gameplay next, and for the most part it's standard light gun stuff. You progress through each stage, kill all the monsters, progress onto another part of the stage until you eventually get to the boss, kill the boss, go on to the next stage. There's 4 stages, 4 bosses. All of that is quite similar. Now where it differs slightly from some light gun games is it depends how well you perform throughout the stages as to what path you take in the game, which is great because you'll see different places usually every time you play through the game, and that keeps it a little bit fresh, gives it a little bit of variety, and that is good. In terms of power-ups within the game, this is where the gameplay slightly suffers because there really isn't that many. You can collect health items to give you extra lives, you can collect gold coins and frogs which give you extra points, and that is it. Your character simply has the gun that they start with, and you will use that weapon for the entire game. There are no rocket launchers, machine guns or shotguns, nothing like that. But in terms of the way the game plays absolutely fantastically. I feel it's fast, it's responsive, and above anything else, it is fun. It is a really enjoyable light gun game, and even though it doesn't perform particularly well, you don't really notice it when you're in the flow of the game because it is that enjoyable to play. So overall in the gameplay department, although there aren't really any varieties with the weapons that you can use with each character, the game plays fantastically well. So moving on to content and lifespan next, and we've got 4 stages to play through with 4 bosses, with arcade mode, Saturn mode and boss mode being your modes of play. Arcade mode is a replica of the arcade game. Saturn mode enables you to pick your character to play through the game as. There's a few characters to pick from, a couple of extra ones that can be unlocked with a code, and they all have varying attributes in terms of the amount of bullets they can hold, how quick they reload, the damage they cause. So this is good because it gives you variety when you play through the game. You can decide which character is your favourite, and you've also got a boss mode as well where you try and defeat each boss one after another and try and get the best possible time. So like always, that leaves us with our 2 final questions. Is the House of the Dead still worth playing today, and does it potentially make our PAL Top 10 or even our worldwide Sega Saturn Top 10? Now without a doubt, House of the Dead is still a very enjoyable, fun game to play, and it is well worth playing in this day and age still, especially if you've got somebody else to play with, because 2-player light gun games are simply so much fun. And as soon as you start playing the game, you'll simply look past the visual discrepancies and the performance, and you will enjoy your time with this game. I have got no doubt about it. Now, does it have enough to get into our PAL Top 10 or even our worldwide Top 10? Unfortunately, the answer is no. And that's simply because light gun games don't have enough content. Even though the House of the Dead has probably got slightly more than a lot of the other light gun games from this point in time, it's still not enough. And the fact it's got pretty ropey visuals and performance as well just bring it down a notch or two. And I'm pretty sure that's what most magazines said about this game at the time. The visuals were not good enough for a 1998 release. But of course, these are just my thoughts and my thoughts alone. Did anybody out there play this on the Saturn when it came out, or even in the arcade originally? Let me know with a comment down below. And like always, I'll be back in the near future with another review. Goodbye for now.